The grandson of a direct line lord is the most hated child in the empire, and his mother is also the most abandoned and despised person in the entire family. He was born without a father, and was physically weak due to the cold curse, so he could not cultivate mana like a normal person. No one knows that Rayon was a slave killer in her previous life, had to live her whole life like a dog that only obeyed her master's orders, and then was killed in anger and held a grudge to be reborn. But unexpectedly, the demon god let Rayon reincarnate into a newborn blonde child, expected to become a swordsman for the powerful northern Shiegak family. In both of his lives, he only had one mother, and he had to work even harder to keep her head held high and live. It seemed like Rayon was just a waste, but then he defeated the best people in his clan one by one so that they wouldn't dare look down on him. By chance, he became friends with the elite demon emperor and also possessed an ability leveling system, and he also trained the most terrifying power in the empire. Taking revenge on the person who killed him in his previous life as his goal, Rayon gradually stepped on the path of a person with true power. In a dark, cold night, moonlight peeked through high clouds. The scene of a mansion appeared. In there, the silhouette of a man wearing a black jacket named Rayon was kneeling on one knee. He glared at the man with long silver hair in front of him, who was Lord Darius Robert. The Lord's face showed a cold and expressionless expression. Rumor has it that Rayon will die at the hands of Darius on this clear moonlit night. Darius praised Rayon for the victories he had brought. He bowed his head and smiled softly, saying that it was his duty. Darius smiled evilly again, asking Rayon if he thought a shadow needed freedom. Rayon closed his eyes in denial. The Lord frowned and told the truth that he knew Rayon broke the law. Under the moonlight, the Lord's face turned black. Rayon seemed to collapse. His eyes widened in fear. Darius opened his blue eyes wide, asking Rayon why he was able to escape his brainwashing. Rayon lowered her head, frantically afraid, not knowing why Darius knew the truth. Because in reality, the Robert family optimized the assassination team called the Shadow Team by kidnapping or trading children and turning them into assassins who devoted their lives to the family's cause. There should have been no way let them escape that fate until death. In other words, they are loyal dogs for the Robert family. The male lead Rayon is also an assassin from this family. He must have been brainwashed like his subordinates, but accidentally while on a mission, he was able to remove it. Rayon worriedly asked how he knew. Darius waved his hand. The assassins would all have two chains around their necks. One was through brainwashing, and the second was through anger. Just seeing him snap his fingers, Rayon seemed to be attacked by mysterious power. A tornado of power swirled around his body. Eyes wide open, blood flowing from mouth was hastily covered with hands. A loud scream in the clear moonlit night. Darius laughed evilly. Rayon knelt down bleeding. His heart felt like it was being cut out. The Lord smirked, looking at Rayon sweating profusely with a hostile look in his eyes, surrounded by the red tornado power. It turned out that the Lord had implanted an infection into the assassin's body and was eating away at him from the inside. Rayon bitterly uttered a few curse words, but he was proud of his carefulness. While Darius was mocking him, Rayon could only crouch and open his eyes wide with his bloody mouth. Rayon was kidnapped when she was very young, then raised and became an emotionless assassin in the Robert family. Luckily, once he learned the fire ring, it was a special ability of the strongest sword master on the continent ever, thus helping him escape brainwashing. Rayon thought he could dream of freedom like a hunting dog that could escape from a strange iron cage, but what awaited him was death. He was exhausted, collapsed, blamed his bad fate, filled with hatred, gritted his teeth and punched the floor with sharp eyes. Rayon used all his remaining strength to stand up. Even Lord Darius was surprised. The slave killer put his hands on the floor in a fighting position. His eyes flashed. The fire of hatred in his body burned with determination to do something. Rayon shouted with a crazy face and rushed forward, using his strength to rush towards Darius. The Lord spread his arms and calmly aimed, slashing Rayon's head from his neck, causing blood to flow in all directions. The culprit did not bother to look and turned his head away. Rayon's head fell to the ground, but the shocked expression with wide eyes was still there. Darius stood in front of Rayon's body, his eyes showing a slight sadness. He turned away and raised his slightly injured hand, hating being injured by the hound he trained. Not forgetting to glance back at Rayon's head, the Lord walked proudly. 2 assassins jumped from above and landed next to Rayon's body to clean up the mess. Rayon's eyes were still wide open, reflecting the image of Lord T. Darius, one of the strongest warriors on the continent, so defeating an assassin like him was inevitable. But even at the beginning of her death, Rayon still kept blaming her fate. Recalling the memory, his loved one died in a sea of fire right in front of him, his useless hands stretched out, unable to do anything. Now he regrets letting Darius play with him. Even when he died, he still couldn't complete the fire ring. While reaching the bottom of death, Rayon asked for help from gods, even demons. Anyone was welcome as long as they helped him come back for revenge. His hands no longer had strength, but his mind still remembered the bitterness. Anyone please help me. Suddenly, the dragon wing television wire next to it flashed a blue light of power. The evil system pops up announcing that the body is dead, anger has chosen you, and then everything just sinks into nothingness. In contrast to that dark and colorful place, the romantic scene with sunlight shining gently on the lilies looks so warm. Butterfly wings fluttered as the call of a luxurious woman with golden hair and a rattling children's toy appeared in front of Rayon. His vision got closer and he clearly saw a chubby little child's hand appear, a golden-haired newborn baby just like his mother babbling to hold him. The male protagonist Rayon has reincarnated into the body of this blonde child. Sylvia picked up her son and rubbed his cheek with a happy expression, without seeing any discontent on his face. Rayon puffed her cheeks because she still couldn't get used to the scene of being held high by her mother, but the most awkward thing was that she was reincarnated but still kept her killer memories. At first, because I couldn't accept the truth, I thought I was dreaming. Little Sylvia Rayon looked out the window, hoping the Lord would return soon to give her son a name, because in this life he had never been called anything other than his mother's sunshine. Turning his red eyes to look at his mother, Rayon wondered who the Lord was. Did he know that person? This family seems very wealthy. The room is filled with sparkling, expensive luxury items. He felt lucky to have been reborn into this powerful noble family. He remembered Darius and he wanted revenge. He still clearly remembers his anger and hatred before his death, but he needs to be patient. Mother Sylvia held the sunshine and stood in front of the huge room, not knowing that her newborn son was constantly thinking about perfecting the fire ring. At that time, although he was the strongest assassin in the Robert family, he had no chance. So now reborn, Rayon must endure, suppress his emotions and desires, and take revenge when the time is ripe. While looking at the magnificent palace, he was suddenly startled by a girl in a maid outfit opening the door to announce that the Lord had returned. Sylvia could not hide her panic, stammering and waiting for her father to return. The maid approached the young lady, saying there was no time to prepare anything. The Lord had already arrived at the door. Rayon realized that his mother was clearly worried. The sound of men's shoes echoed from outside and made both of their faces pale. Even a skilled assassin like Rayon frowned, not understanding what the hell this presence was. Just seeing the backlit man's silhouette walking steadily step by step, Rayon was worried who his grandfather was that had such an overwhelming feeling that made him feel so worried. The Lord had the same blonde hair as his daughter, passing by 2 subordinates and going straight to Sylvia and her mother, causing her anxiety to grow more and more. Rayon began to realize that he seemed to know this person, unable to hide his eyes staring at that tall figure. The mouth is covered with golden whiskers. Is this that baby? Making Rayon worried was definitely the king of the north, with hair shining the color of sunlight and eyes glowing red with fire on a face as cold as ice cast over thousands of years. Known as the owner of the greatest family on the continent, Glent Zieghartz looked at his nephew with a questioning look, making Rayon purse his lips and look at him with fear. While afraid of Glenn's prestige, he was also shocked to realize that he had been reincarnated into the strongest family on the continent. The Lord picked up the sunshine, looked at the boy and gave him the name Rayon, meaning quietly as if he did not exist. Looking at Glenn with wide eyes in disbelief, he could not have imagined that after overcoming life and death, he would have the same name as when he became a subordinate of the Robert family. After naming, the Lord left without saying anything else, No one knew what he was thinking to give his nephew such a gloomy name. At night in the majestic room, Rayon woke up with a listless face after overcoming 100 days of depression. In this small body, he sometimes falls asleep when his mother hugs him, but somehow he can't control his manner. Rayon flipped the blanket over, breathed softly, then began condensing the fire ring according to his memory. Unlike other skills, using natural manner and your own aura mixed together. But there is another way to create a circle of energy around the heart and take the ability to assimilate with nature's manner to another level. The body's endurance therefore also increases. Ideal for the user to become a warrior is the ultimate skill that Rayon is using. Even Lord Darius did not discover this strange practice. If Rayon cultivates the body and mind by using condensed fire rings and combining the famous swordsmanship of the GA, then the revenge on Darius Robert will no longer be unrealistic. Rayon looked at the cold little body without any trace of fire, thinking maybe the cold was due to the manner. Then he closed his eyes and studied how to clear the flow of manners with fire pills. Not to mention he knew that if he couldn't break the blockage, his body would not be able to stand the cold and die. What Rayon needs to do is fuse fire and ice together to create balance within herself. The full moon in the dark night filled with the sound of crickets. Rayon opened her eyes. Before her eyes was the palace where she was reincarnated. He lay down tiredly, frowned and fell asleep even though he tried to speed up the process even more. Late at night, Glent silently approached the child in front of him, reaching out to gently stroke his newly met nephew. The scene gradually changed from dark to daytime. Rayon was crawling on the ground following the encouragement of his mother Sylvia, pretending to be a child as usual. Every time he had to crawl and try to grasp the toy in Sylvia's hand, he was as tired as the whites of his eyes, cursing under his breath. Damn how tired he was. Mama picked up her child and praised her, but she didn't know that Rayon was frowning. Suddenly she heard a knock on the door. Sylvia smiled and welcomed the new guest, an old man with white hair and beard whom she called Saint. The old man laughed happily and comfortably, only the little boy didn't understand what was going on. He wasn't sure if this was a holy wrath or not, whose holy power and holy magic skills were among the best in the continent. Being the most famous healer but extremely difficult to meet once in a lifetime, the old man stroked his beard wondering about the child, held him up high and then asked the child's name. Sylvia hesitated for a while before replying that his name was Rayon. The old man glanced very dissatisfied with this name. He didn't understand what Glent meant. How could he name a little boy a shadow? Maybe his brain was stuck. Based on the memories of his previous life, Rayon knew that Angerton and Glent were friends, but how close he was, he did not know. The old man held Rayon, then placed his hand on the boy's belly to examine it while Sylvia stood aside worrying. Just a few seconds later, Angerton frowned and silently complained that something was wrong. After Sylvia asked him, he said that the boy was stuck with an ice curse inside. His veins were blocked by ice and had to be treated soon or he wouldn't be able to live. He returned Rayon to Sylvia, and added that he should forget about the boy's future as a swordsman, making her startled and scared beyond belief. Fanton thoughtfully said he would give her medicine to maintain her health. Before the words were finished, a maid came in and invited the saint to follow her master's words and continued to tease him, making him bored and unable to linger any longer. Watching his leaving back, Rayon finally knew that what was inside him was cursed ice. Suddenly, a drop of water fell on his face, and his mother's whole body trembled. Tears streamed down as Rayon mourned the fate of his unfortunate son who had not yet grown up much but had to endure the damn ice curse. Wiping away the tears from her eyes, she hugged her son tightly, knelt down and vowed to do everything to protect him. What does this feel like? His little heart ached, his whole body felt inexplicably tired, as if he were an adult Rayon who fully understood his mother's miserable feelings without expecting her to have to go through it. Don't cry, he doesn't want his mother to cry, then raised his hand to touch Sylvia's face. Startled to look at her tiny son's tiny arm touching her tears, Sylvia stared blankly, hearing her son call Mom, Mom. She seemed completely determined when looking at the child. Then while the saint and her father were talking, Sylvia ignored the maid's intervention and opened the door and rushed straight into the room. In front of her half-worried, half-determined eyes, Glent only frowned and asked without reason what was that. Saying that, the human glared directly at the girl, causing Sylvia to put her hands down, crouched close to the floor, her trembling voice begging her father, "Please save Rayon." Despite his pleas, Glent still calmly held a cup of tea in his hand. Sylvia was filled with tears. Her mouth kept begging because her son was all she had. The Lord still calmly blew smoke on the teacup, telling him frankly that the boy would not live to be a warrior. Why did he need help if he was not useful? As soon as he heard Sylvia trembling in defense that he was his father's nephew, he coldly asked what was the result after leaving home. Sylvia was heartbroken to hear what her father said, that she would only let him have the last name Ga no matter how earnestly his daughter cried. Glent still coldly called the guards to quickly take her out. Her hands were dragged out of the room, but Sylvia still did not give up, trying to turn her head and scream, "Please, father, save Rayon." Each sentence she shouted sounded more desperate than the last until she was dragged outside and closed the door. The new space was quiet. Angrily looking at Sylvia, he sighed and blamed Glent for being hot on the inside and cold on the outside. "Is it really that hard to be honest?" "Granted," Glent said. Pham Ton was concerned, so he asked the old man to come check on the boy. But now the Lord doesn't want to explain, he just frowns at his current illness. There is no outward expression of happiness or sadness, so Pham Ton has to reiterate that he cannot be a warrior. But Glent didn't care, he just wanted it alive. The obvious but unexpressed love made Pham Ton know for sure that the Lord had feelings for his nephew, so why did he give the name Rayon such a gloomy sound? About to take another sip of tea, Glent stopped to ponder, briefly saying Rayon doesn't just mean night or shadow. Looking at his reflection on the surface of the hot tea, Glent still did not explain clearly, only saying that 1,000 years ago that name had a completely different meaning. Another beautiful sunny day in the huge castle. Sylvia is feeding her son medicine, her mouth always coaxing the pill, so even if it's bitter, take it. Both she and the maid closed their eyes, afraid that Rayon would cry. Who would have thought that when he only heard the child's babbling in his ears, the boy's eyes widened and he asked for another night. Sylvia and her maid Helen were so happy that they shed tears of joy. It was unexpected that at such a young age they could understand their mother's feelings. Holding Rayon in her arms, Sylvia happily looked through the window with relief. He knew this medicine was bitter, but he had to have it in order to condense the fire ring and kill him with the curse in his body, so he had to swallow it. The little girl's face looked unhappy, but she could add another spoon or that spoon. 2 years have passed since he started practicing and taking medicine. Rayon appeared with a larger form. The fire ring has reached 1 star. And then another 2 years passed. In the mornings I would play with my mother and Helen, in the afternoon I would eat and sleep, and at night I would spend time practicing. Time passes like that. Now Rayon is 5 years old. The fire ring has also been upgraded accordingly. He smiled lightly and lifted his finger towards the system, happy because he had created the second fire ring, helping him turn the fire into a cross shape. Sensitivity to manner has increased a bit more clearly. While thinking, I was interrupted by the maid's voice, asking if I could take the clothes to the laundry. While she was getting the things, Rayon looked to make sure and thought, it's true that no one else can see the system other than herself. When Rayon achieved the first fire pill, he suddenly saw the system appear without any warning. When he saw that there were lots of words explaining the status of his skills, he was startled to realize that he had been saved by heaven. At that time, little Rayon tried to point at the status window and babble, but Helen didn't see anything, still the same to this day. Everything went quite smoothly, but even though he had 2 fire pills, his poor physical condition and ice curse still did not improve at all. Starting to think about the past 5 years, Rayon lamented that if there hadn't been a holy medicine to regulate the cold, along with her mother Sylvia, Helen and many others contributing to constantly check the young master's condition, it certainly wouldn't have been possible. How can I get 2 simple fire pills? Feeling tired, he rubbed his neck and propped himself up to comfort himself. After all, he was only 5 years old and had plenty of time to slowly improve. Thinking back, Rayon gets tired easily even with normal movements, but his fate as an assassin in his previous life has trained him to have an iron mind. Now that I have a fire ring, learning the Zgat family's sword skills in the future will definitely improve my physical health. Looking at her tender hand, Rayon silently controlled her impatient thoughts. After all, Darius is also a candidate for the title of strongest human on the continent. The number of people who can kill him can only be counted on the fingers of one hand, so he must gradually increase his strength very carefully. The opportunity to finish off Darius only comes once, and Rayon must do it once and for all. While thinking about it, the mother appeared at the door calling her son's name. Rayon stared blankly at Sylvia, exuding nobility in her formal attire. She gently told Rayon to change and go to the main building. Rayon looked out the window and wondered, is today that day? In this era, 6 kings and 5 demons maintained the balance of power on the continent, and the Zgat family he was reincarnated into was one of those 6 kings. Sitting on the carriage, he thought, kings and demons are like the dark and light sides of peace and war, so any events of the leaders are related to the general situation. Today, the carriage took Sylvia and her mother to the main building of the Zgat family to participate in the solemn judgment ceremony once a year. The banquet hall was filled with nobles' chatter about both the results of last year's judgment and this year's situation. Of course, they couldn't ignore the fact that Sylvia was also present today without fearing that she would hear their disparaging words when she appeared at the lobby door. The atmosphere immediately became gloomy, and they became the focus of attention from hostile eyes that were unhappy to see the two appear. Whispers echoed around the little boy walking alongside, and the insults of Rayon's dirty blood rang out more and more, accompanied by comments of dissatisfaction that the standard of the judgment ceremony was significantly reduced when the mother and daughter were present. Rayon began to feel discomfort brewing inside him because he was a reincarnated person, so the Zgat clan's family matters were not worth worrying about, but he did not want her to have to endure the direct cursing at Sylvia. Then he frowned in anger. Suddenly his mother Rayon's words, "It's okay," pulled him back to reality. Her eyes were resilient as if not affected at all, still looking straight and telling her son to only look at his mother. Rayon did not respond, silently holding her mother's hand and walking into the hall until there was a sound outside announcing that the homeowner was entering, and the target of the crowd's attention immediately changed direction. Rayon raised his red eyes and looked at the large footsteps in the red coat, sparkling with the emblem. Glent sat down majestically in the sunlight in his lord's chair. He looked around with a cold face, lightly tapping his index finger. Suddenly, in the lobby, a giant super sword appeared, towering from the floor. Rayon stared at it with wide eyes. Wasn't that a sword of judgment? It showed how much a person's main or talent could reach by placing their hands on it. Glent's guards read the list of the first person to start the ritual as Burden Zegard. A blue-haired boy about Rayon's age on the second floor stood up, loudly taking roll call, then came to touch the sword. This is a way to reveal the ability to use Manor in all children up to 4 years old in the Zegard family. The sword will emit light of the attribute, which is currently the blue color of the wind element, illuminating the entire room. Those behind the scenes praised Burden's qualities for his bright colors, not to mention his main bloodline, which made the boy even more noble. Glent simply commented on each attribute, but the wind must definitely feel every passing wind. Next is the turn of a silver-haired girl named Rena Anshunlian. This flip light is blue. Standing from afar, Rayon noticed the blade that changed the purity of the Manor and the color attribute expressed in the hilt, passing by the watchers who were constantly talking. Just by doing this, the family member's talent was determined, making Rayon guess that her part would not go well. How could his 2 fire rings be shown here when his Manor's veins still had a lot of ice curses binding them? I thought I didn't care much, but when I read the name Rayon and received dozens of unsympathetic looks, Rayon, even if she didn't want to, had to move forward under her grandfather's strict eyes. Rayon also did not expect anything from this test. Only my mother is always there to encourage me. He thought to himself, just go ahead and check which attributes are suitable for future development. So Rayon's face was still very calm and he listened to his mother's instructions, put his hand on it and that was it. But right before touching it, he suddenly sweated nervously. As soon as he touched the giant sword, golden light of fire appeared so strongly that his whole body seemed to awaken. Opening his eyes wide in surprise, the scene of the hunting dogs and enemies from his previous life appeared right before his eyes. The demon's eyes seemed to have been waiting for a long time, staring at a young man in a red robe with golden hair, standing in front of 5-year-old Rayon. Who is this? He didn't know, he just half knelt and half sat wondering what was going on. He held his sword high and concentrated the power of fire without saying a word. With a flash of light, the power and the demons mixed together. The previous threat from the demons now only had round eyes. The entire space exploded and the ground was mixed together, a source of enormous power, causing demons to fly in all directions. Rayon returned to reality and opened his eyes wide, shocked and unable to believe what he was seeing. The light that shone on the sword was less than half full and was extinguished for unknown reasons. Glent did not complain and announced the end of the ritual and sent everyone home. Everyone had a disdainful smile. The butlers also took their masters away one by one. The door slammed shut with a quiet scene, leaving the two people inside. Glent put his hand on his chin and complained to the butler, "After all, I don't expect anything from this boy." Suddenly the stone sword flashed, causing the lord to panic and not believe his eyes. Fire and bright yellow light were surrounding the entire sword, swirling and making sounds like a storm, causing Glent to be stunned. That is the golden light of the sun. Remembering what I read when researching Manhwa, that the aura that the first Seaguard clan leader had was a terrible power enough to extinguish the fires of evil. Glent muttered golden Manhwa and Manhwa. This type of brilliant golden Manhwa had only appeared once in the entire history of the family. Now, Glent never expected to see with his own eyes how beautiful and dazzling it was. The great scene before our eyes is the golden fire covering the stone sword. His mood changed from disappointment to expectation. This Rayon grandson had never been a pitiful person. Another 7 years passed when Rayon turned 12 years old, opened the system in the majestic mountain landscape. He smiled knowing that he was about to reach the third fire ring. Rayon sat on the vast steppe thinking about her strength increasing over time. 2-star water resistance prevents frostbite from spreading and causing stiff limbs like before. Even though his body was still struggling, he had improved a lot compared to before. Just as he was thinking that he needed to exercise, Sylvia's gentle call to his son reminded him to hurry up before he was late. Although Rayon looked unhappy, she still had to follow her mother's instructions and participate in the second judgment ritual. The door opened, the princes and marquis sat quietly. Today's ceremony was only for those in the direct line, so the ceremony was much simpler. When reading Rayon Ziegert's name, everyone's eyes turned to him. Glent's grandfather blamed his grandson for remaining silent and not responding to the clan member training course even though the notice was sent a month ago. While Rayon was still bewildered and did not understand what was going on, Sylvia stepped forward with a worried expression and explained that this was too much for Rayon. But Glent sternly disagreed, coldly reminding her that in this family members of the Diegert family had no right to refuse. Seeing that her father was about to get angry, Sylvia was about to defend her son, but she heard some harsh insults about her running away from home 10 years ago and kept silent. Living on the Diegert family's land, he is a member of the family. If he can't do it, then go away. Her father's decisive words made Sylvia silently grit her teeth and endure. There were whispers around her talking about her past and her strength even though Sylvia was bowing her head hopelessly into the abyss. Rayon finally understood why her mother was treated like that. It's because she left this family because she didn't have the talent for martial arts even though she had practiced for many years. Desperate for herself, Sylvia broke the energy core and mono ring and ran away from home, marrying Rayon's father, but unfortunately he died early. Poor Sylvia had no place to turn and had to return home and was treated worse than her family. But as her son, Rayon did not want to see his mother humiliated. Sylvia was stunned when she saw that the figure passing by her, steadfast like an adult, belonged to her 12-year-old son. He did not turn his head to face the muffled call. His eyes widened as if he had made up his mind and walked towards Glent, agreeing to participate in the training course. Zener of the martial arts hall looked at the boy with concern. His skinny body was too skinny to even be able to withstand the intensity of exercise. He loudly told his grandfather, "I already have the Zagard family name, so I will have to prove that I am worthy of it." Suddenly Glent was angry. staring at his nephew, asking him again if he knew the seriousness of mentioning the name Zagard. The oppressive power radiating from his grandfather with just a frown was like a hurricane sweeping through his small body. Tiny strands of blood splattered on the ground. Rayon was so scared that his face turned white, not understanding the feeling of his skin being torn into pieces. His hands tightened when he realized he was under a greater threat than Darius Robert, whom he always wanted revenge on. Because in front of him was the warrior, the destructive king of the north. 1 second he was still strong, the next he had to soften and fall to the ground while Sylvia and Halen quickly hugged him and asked for forgiveness. Senior could not sit still and immediately spoke up to help. After all, as a child, how could he endure the terrible pressure of the family head? But Glent refused to give in, continuing to radiate an oppressive aura that made Sylvia and Senior close their mouths. But as the boy's mother, how could she let her child suffer? Sylvia rushed over to him to get Rayon, constantly begging her father to take back the pressure. The boy's body really couldn't participate in training. Sylvia's tears once again fell into Rayon's barren soul. He remembered that assassins were people who lived in darkness and were always closer to death than life, never revealing themselves. But now Rayon is no longer an assassin. He has the motivation to leave the past and move towards the bright light ahead. Turning his head to look back, the hidden past of an assassin was waving him forward. Rayon gritted his teeth in displeasure, then stepped forward and stood proudly in front of his grandfather to bring Sylvia's mother back to her original position of a direct line lady. I grew up in the annex, not the main castle, so I don't know how arrogant the name Zagard is. That's why I want to see with my own eyes what Zagard is like by participating in training. His clear words were like his determination to live as Rayon Zagard, Sylvia's child, and cherish the precious happy moments with his mother and those around him. With this hand, even though she was sweating profusely and her body ached, Rayon was determined to achieve her set goal. Still continuing to question the boy, "Do you want to go to training to evaluate your family?" He was breathing heavily as if he was very lacking in air. He firmly replied that this was the way for me to understand the family. Finally, his grandfather agreed. He nodded to show that he understood, and his weak body fell down. Rayon subconsciously still wanted to win the highest position in the family. After all, he was once a very good killer and knew how to take advantage of his abilities. In his days, his hand was still clenched, determined to show the Lord how tough the pebble he always despised was. Observing the family's young masters practicing wooden swords enthusiastically on the field, the instructor returned to report to Caroline Zagard, the owner of the Tamdeen martial arts, about a weak boy coming to practice. They installed a close maid in the main castle, overheard the conversation between Fan Tan and the homeowner, and learned that Rayon really had health problems. And in Caroline's memory, the boy's body was not normal, so how could he withstand the pressure? He raised his chin and remembered that Sylvia had also been the most talented person during the training period, so he suddenly ordered a spy to be placed in the auxiliary mansion. Over there, Rayon was still trying to practice, ignoring the worried Sylvia who ran after her because she was afraid that if she tried too hard, she would faint. Breathing heavily and sweating, I still ran forward. The road I needed to walk was still very long and wide. At training ground number 5, Lord Glent walked before the respectful attention of his guards. He found a red-haired light sword guy named Rimmer Dyers lying on the sofa with a stack of documents on the ground. He called Rimmer up. He slowly took the hat off his face until he saw Glent smiling and frowning teasingly at the patriarch. Not responding to that smile, he crossed his arms and criticized why he didn't practice but lay nearby. Is using the head different from using the body? That's the argument, but it doesn't convince Glenn. After being criticized by the patriarch for 50 years, he's still acting like before, like a child who can never change. Suddenly changing the subject, Rimmer asked him if he came for his youngest grandson. Looking at the Lord with interest, he reminded that Lady Sylvia had come before but did not expect her father to also come. Seeing that Glenn was surprised that his daughter had come here, he put his hands on his hips and reminded them of the past. The patriarch himself had said that no one was allowed to interfere in training school number 5, including him. However, the patriarch nodded and said yes, I did say that, making him surprised. thinking he was here to protect his nephew. Who would have thought that he would ask to increase the intensity of training and eliminate the weak? Rimmer suddenly covered his gaping mouth. Because if that method was applied, Glenn's nephew would be kicked out after a few days. The patriarch realized that he was worried about his nephew, so he wanted to send him back quickly. Rimmer covered his face and spoke in a squeaky voice like, I know you're worried about him, but don't dare say it. This type of joking was not Glenn's style. If it weren't for his former army teammate, he would have kicked him in the face. He didn't forget to tell his friend to only leave behind qualified people. Rimmer also did not protest and agreed. After saying that, Glenn left. Rimmer did not forget to send his friend off with a smile. He stood in the large room with a pile of papers and documents wondering about Rayon, who had made the patriarch appear in person. At that time, Rayon sat in the room and received the notification that the system had achieved the third fire ring. He smiled proudly at what he had achieved. I remember when I was risking my life to practice. Sylvia's mother was by my side and the magic status window also helped me become a lot stronger. But this is just the beginning. The Zygarde family's training is the most famous and arduous. 3 stars is just the beginning of a trainee position, so a more solid foundation is needed. Rayon made up his mind to show off his superior achievements and wanted to make those who had insulted him pay the price. After all, the holy immortal sword lord Darius Robert is the ultimate target. He clenched his fist, vowing to slit the throat of the enemy who killed him in his previous life. While I was thinking, suddenly there was a knock on the door. The mother came in to see if her son was sleeping, surprising Rayon. Sylvia sat down on the bed next to her child, saying she had something to say. She turned around with a loving expression and said that she wanted to stop Rayon because she was afraid he would get hurt. While training, she saw with her own eyes that her son was injured all over his body. He didn't know how much further he would go to the training school. Then put your hand on your child's shoulder and ask if it's possible to postpone it for a year? While giving her son a chance to think again, Sylvia suddenly heard her son's refusal. Every time I see the disdainful smiles and bad treatment of relatives like me, a weak person, I feel very uncomfortable. When they were appreciative, my mother and I always felt angry and unable to move. Seeing him make such a determination, although Sylvia felt uncomfortable, she was speechless. Sylvia looked down, smiling proudly at her only son. She nervously clicked her fingers and confided to Rayon. Such a smart boy must have realized the reason his mother lived alone under the curse of the world. Rayon's parents met while on a mission, but because of their status as knight and lady, they could not be together. Because of love, Sylvia destroyed Mark Maynor and his mind's energy and abandoned the family. And he also has a sister named Sihan who is 2 years older than me. While living peacefully, an army of Eden recognized and assassinated the whole family. Sylvia and her husband tried to fight back, but her husband was not strong enough to defeat the entire army and Sylvia herself was pregnant, so there was nothing she could do. At that moment, Sylvia could only stand still and watch the ending. Although Rayon's father always silently arranged bodyguards to protect his wife, the distance was too far and by the time they arrived it was too late. When her father and first daughter died, Sylvia seemed to collapse and scream, her red eyes filled with tears constantly on her miserable face. At that time, his mother was forced to return to the clan and become a criminal. Sylvia told her son the story with a helpless expression. Rayon also listened quietly and then raised his head to blame his mother for being selfish in her thoughts. Sylvia gave up responsibility to pursue her own happiness and then turned back to ask for help. But he also did not forget that it was she who gave him his second life, both lives as a human. Rayon now knows what a mother's heart is, as vast as the ocean of abundant peace. He asked his mother if she regretted it. Sylvia shook her head. Because I felt alive after leaving the palace and living happily with my husband. The mother smiled and said that she is very happy now to have a child. She suddenly lowered her voice and said she was not a good mother, but before letting her blame herself, Rayon touched her mother's hand and said it was okay. No matter what Sylvia is, Rayon's mother has given him precious love that nothing can exchange. His son's gentle comfort touched a corner of his heart filled with grief. Sylvia twisted her mouth and tried to stop her crying but could not. Finally, her sobbing was so loud that it echoed throughout the castle. A moment later, after his mother left, he sighed tiredly and sat on the bed, crossed his legs and clasped his hands to check the fire ring. A blue flame ran around his body. The fire ring's rotation speed was faster. He was surprised by the scene before his eyes. The fire ring was burning more and more, concentrating into a large flame that emitted a strange sound. The shadowy face of the demon world's proposed demon appeared, smiling strangely, not knowing anything and declaring that I will avenge you. Rayon stammered in fear, not knowing what this was. Then the system announced that the rage ability had been activated. As he eloquently declared his body and soul this and that, his face suddenly opened wide and he realized something was wrong. Why was there a child here? Rayon and the Demon Lord questioned who the other was for a while. He had to introduce himself out of rage, but there was no way a brat could erupt with something so powerful. He explained the problem to himself in surprise. His strange eyes looked at the boy in front of him. His loud voice said that Rayon was hiding a very deep resentment in his heart. This was originally his deep secret, but it was easily grasped and leaked. So Rayon cautiously glanced at the demon flying around him, luring him into exchanging his soul to help him avenge his revenge. In my heart, remembering when he was killed at the hands of Lord Rayon, he prayed to the devil for anything. Perhaps the devil had appeared, but now it was too late. Bluntly refusing the demon's contract surprised him. Hearing the boy say that he would kill the enemy with his own hands, he smiled devilishly. You kid, you seem to be mistaken. I didn't come here to negotiate. With a devilish smile, he flew high, causing a cold fire to invade Rayon's body, causing him to hug himself in fear of what the hell was going on. Roaring with his mouth, just sacrifice his body to me. The demon lord flew like the wind to Rayon. He was startled, scared and backed away without being able to avoid the tundra headbutt from him and a loud sound like waves hitting the rocky shore. One like for you only takes 1 second, but it makes Tom happy all day. Like to give Tom the motivation to create more stories, my dear. The water in the glass and the window began to slowly freeze. Even Rayon felt like his whole body was cold due to being frozen, and even his mind and feelings gradually receded. Realizing that this guy's attribute must be ice to cause Rayon's body such pain, he desperately propped himself up on the ground to endure the pain. He surrounded Rayon, transforming into his most hated form to stimulate the opponent to release his rage so that the essence could finish it off. Rayon sat hugging herself and shivering, enduring the cold air that enveloped the whole room. Thanks to his water resistance skill, he was able to endure all this time, but the problem was not simply a matter of temperature because the old demon was constantly transforming and inciting hatred. Whispering into Rayon's ear, he seduced Rayon about how he would take out his hatred on his enemies. He gritted his teeth and thought about the people around him and vowed not to give his body to others. Who knows what this guy will do to Mother and the others if Rayon loses consciousness. Ma Tun flew over Rayon's head like a fly, constantly whispering to leave your body comfortably, baby. If it's too hard, he'll smash it to pieces and then suck it dry. Rayon's whole body seemed to be broken, his face turned pale. He hugged himself in vain, thinking he was about to die again, then suddenly realized he could endure physical pain by using fire rings. So he quickly clasped his hands together and put all his strength into performing the fire ring while he was drenched in sweat. The blue ice fire was gradually repelled by the red and yellow fire surrounding Rayon. Ma Tun closed his eyes and sweated in fear. He gritted his teeth in disbelief because he had just appeared and was already being ravaged by a lowly human. Rayon concentrated on performing the fire ring without responding. When he opened his eyes, his voice firmly replied that I would avenge myself. I refused to let a wandering soul possess my body. Demon Venerable Dean was foolish in the face of Rayon's provocations. He flew up high and angrily shouted at the demon venerable of a world. Who are you calling a wandering soul, guy? Rayon remembered him saying earlier that he had just awakened, so he probably wouldn't be able to use his full power. While thinking, the system appeared to unlock additional abilities, causing Rayon to not understand why. Only Demon Venerable up there roared, "It's my thing. It's my status window. Who let you use it?" Hearing Rayon ask what these were, Ma Tun was unhappy and flew around saying that the system was created by him. But for what purpose, he refused to explain, so Rayon had to throw in another sentence to promote growth. Ma Tun looked like he didn't want to say anything, but accidentally revealed the truth and asked how he knew. The fire ring became stronger and stronger than before without any reason. He thought perhaps this life was thanks to the system. Seeing that this guy was silent, Ma Tun screamed madly, demanding that Rayon sacrifice his body and return his power. Rayon's commotion caused him to get punched, and he cursed this guy for being rude. Waving his hand, Rayon bluntly criticized him for being the kind of thing that makes people want to punch him, poking Ma Tun's messy beak and constantly cursing people for not being reasonable. Still leisurely sitting on the bed with her arms crossed, thinking, Rayon kept waving her hand to chase Ma Tun away, taking the opportunity to see if she could touch this strange person. The old man was flying around and suddenly attacked his arm, turning into a green gas that stuck to his wrist. When looking at his arm, Rayon discovered that Ma Tun had transformed into a blue flower bracelet surrounding a black string. Before leaving, he declared that he would return when the time was right. Rayon frowned and looked at the bracelet made from Ma Tun with hateful eyes, finding this guy really annoying. But he knew he couldn't force him to separate. Besides the fear of losing his system, who knew what this guy could do to his mother and maid just to force him? That's it, still with disgusted eyes, but keeping Ma Tun by his side to supervise is still better. Part of Rayon believes that he can progress quickly to overcome him. The moon shone high above the entire castle. Rayon's room only had lights on. His voice wondered why it was a flower bracelet. Just as he was about to evaluate the sound, he mumbled to shut up. People's preferences were their opinions. What the heck? A new day began with the sun shining through the mountains. Helen was comforting Sylvia in front of the main hall. Both of them showed worried and sullen faces even when they saw Rayon coming down with a very different appearance. Today is the first day her son has to go to training school. In front of the mansion gate, the two girls told Rayon over and over again to be careful and take care of her health. Looking at the owner's sad face, Helen had to comfort Sylvia, who was clearly depressed, watching over her son who was worried about his mother. That's right, Sylvia sat down and put her hand on her son's shoulder, repeating if something was too difficult, then ignore him. After finishing, Rayon smiled and left. In the distance were still Sylvia and Helen standing sadly as they had to say goodbye to Rayon. Sylvia still couldn't help but worry about her son, but luckily Helen was there to comfort him. Knowing that Rayon had also improved a lot, she still couldn't hide the insecurity in her eyes. Remembering just now, she couldn't bear to let Rayon leave, so she hugged him tightly. A good son still knows how to comfort his mother, but she cannot avoid saying goodbye in tears during the separation. Standing in front of the mansion door, watching her son's shadow go away, she could only put her hope in her son and then suddenly cried and trembled behind Rayon's back. At GAG Training School Number 5, the students whispered about the difficulty of the school. In front of them was a fortified citadel with red flags hanging around. Rayon also glanced at and observed, not only relatives but also people nominated by the vassal family. Suddenly he heard gossip from afar. There were two boys on the other side who were sarcastic about Rayon and criticized the demon's flower bracelet, making him so angry that he had to appear. The devil flew out in front of those two boys and cursed all kinds of things that they didn't see. But when Rayon coldly said, "Why do you have to speak so softly? Come here and say it directly to my face," his straightforward look scared the hell out of them, causing them to join together to fight against the subordinate in the annex who had no authority. Speak up. Only in return was Rayon's tearful frown, asking again what role these two guys had in the family tree to criticize. They were just distant branches and dared to speak here. His words made them grit their teeth and climb. One guy grabbed his dirty collar and threw his fist at Rayon, preparing to declare war. Not dodging, Rayon glared, and just as he was about to counterattack, he was interrupted by the voice of the legitimate descendant Baron Zigard. The other two separated so Baron came and stood in front of Rayon, crossing his arms and criticizing Rayon to know his own fate. You're just a small grain of sand that I can brush away whenever I want. If I don't want to be kicked out of the building, then I can live in peace. Thinking that when checking the manor, Rayon had attracted the attention of the clan with tricks, not the ability. Baron hated bitterly, gritted his teeth and silently cursed him as an uneducated bastard who could enter this place. Before leaving, he didn't forget to sarcastically say that Rayon didn't intend to participate in the training course, so get out, and he couldn't get over it, so get out soon. Unexpectedly, his calm voice retorted, "It was such nonsense," from behind that the young man immediately turned around and replayed it. "I'm a direct descendant, but what status do you have that threatens to kick me out of the annex? I haven't officially become a student yet, and I don't have a rank yet. How dare you crow so loudly? By the way, even mentioning the matter, I still rely on you." My father, it makes Burden want to punch him so much. The atmosphere was more tense than the strings of a piano. Red-haired teacher Rimmer kicked in the door and appeared like a comedian greeting the audience, asking, Hi, have you guys gone to fight yet?" Right from that moment Rayon recognized him as the light sword of the Zergid clan that he had heard had to retire after the Manor core was seriously damaged. I didn't expect that he was hiding in this place and still looked so excited that he asked if we'd start the fight and continue fighting. With an adult, Burden wouldn't dare do anything. He turned around and left to line up every day. Standing high above, Rimmer introduced that he was the headmaster, the one who would dare to practice closely. He always has a friendly smile, creating a feeling of closeness, and has an appearance much younger than his age, making people sympathetic. Because there were only 8 instructors and 160 students, they needed a bone test. Rimmer now raised his finger to indicate the number 1, meaning to keep only a fourth part. The students below were panicked because the training school selection rate was too high. Meanwhile, the demon lord in Rayon's hand also refused to sit still and started making noise, demanding to tear the teacher's body apart, receiving Rayon's harsh slap to silence him. Rimmer sat down in his chair, standing next to the other instructors. He pointed at the students to tell them to run. Even though the whole group didn't understand what was going on, they still followed the supervisor's instructions. He sat in the back leisurely cheering on the students who were jostling for positions to enter the school. The demon appeared from the bracelet again, urging the blonde boy to run forward, but he refused. Because according to Rayon, what Rimmer wants to evaluate is a person's personality, so he will not pay attention to superficial things. Rayon was sweating profusely, his eyes determined to last until the end. Burden and Rina were competing for the outstanding first and second positions and immediately saw the person in charge praising, "This is not the maximum speed, they can still run for hours." In contrast to the leaders, the teachers in charge kept an eye on Rayon. Looking at his weak appearance, they were not surprised when he often fell behind. Everything is under Rimmer's control. He smirked, raised his hand to stroke his chin, looking amused at Rayon running weakly below. Remembering Glenn, Rimmer thought that only people whose potential he could not see were the strongest because he could not see the depth of their abilities. As for the children who look outstanding, Rimmer can see the characteristics and colors of the children, knowing what their future will be like. Glancing at Rayon's weak appearance, he couldn't see anything. A white color with unknown elements and no future is like a page without ink on it. He smiled strangely, curious about Rayon's strength, interested in assessing this boy's potential, which was clearly beyond his awareness. The 2 guys I met outside the gate just now running ahead, were mocking my endurance. It was true that Rayon was struggling to keep up with the pace, but he didn't understand why he kept running and running. Because in my previous life, they released monsters that had been starved for a long time, so I had to risk my life to run. Rayon suddenly became much happier, a smile clearly appearing on her face because of the simplicity of the test. The competition continues, everyone is running desperately forward. Seeing Rayon's figure running past one more time, Rimmer widened his eyes wondering how the hell this kid could keep running. Rayon's stamina should have been exhausted a long time ago, but this was more than perseverance and stubbornness. Logically speaking, this power can only exist in warriors who have been thoroughly trained, and after each experience of death, they put all their effort into survival. Thanks to that, he became even more curious about this interesting boy. Seeing the person he hated running right behind, Burden frowned in disbelief. A while ago he overheard that there was a high possibility that Sylvia's child would die, not to mention becoming a swordsman. It was clear that every time they met, Rayon's condition was very bad. Burden bit and activated the power to control Auror, widened his eyes and shouted loudly, then rushed forward just to let everyone know how different he was from this guy. He jumped away from Rhinon, leaving behind Rayon, who ran right behind the girl. Huh, he laughed coldly in his heart. That Burden, no matter how he tried, couldn't be compared to the quiet white-haired girl who was focused on running. Rayon ran behind, still thinking that this was a war with himself. It was almost noon, and the number of contestants who couldn't run anymore was increasing. The desired running time was not achieved, but the most bitter question was still the question of how that sick kid could run to this extent. The crowd's complaints hit Rayon's mind, which was still running. Her hair drooped down to cover one red, sweaty eye, cursing that damn group of people for talking nonsense. Right now he feels like his heart and lungs are being squeezed, but he can still prolong his physical strength by continuously using fire rings to maintain it. The sunlight reflected on him, and a determined smile appeared again. While he was tensing his ass muscles, the quintessential demon appeared and criticized Rayon. He smiled and continued his trick of seducing the boy into giving him his body. Rayon's eyes widened, realizing the seriousness of the problem. The quintessence had bared its sharp fangs and wanted to swallow Rayon whole. His heart ached like a bolt of lightning had struck him, but he still tried to endure. Her listless face and dull eyes pretended to remind herself that she didn't want to win that much. By the way, I warned this guy to calm down. He teases the opposite. No mortal can withstand the wrath of the elite emperor. So he harassed the little body more and more intensely, causing him to not be able to hold back and had to put his hands on his chest to hug him and keep running. He opened his mouth to grab the air, determined not to give in for a second, otherwise this devil would rush into him and tear him apart. Seeing this kid's stubbornness, Ma Tun shouted loudly, "What the hell is wrong with him being so stubborn?" He was angry because the anger of the Emperor's elite had no effect, but Rayon was in no mood to explain because he was still opening his mouth trying to regulate his breathing. He felt insensitive to this body because the pain was gradually taking over, causing him to lose control. His eyes blurred, before his eyes were still the silhouettes of Rina and the others running. Rayon wondered if this was the last point he could try. The group of children in front of Rayon were breathing in all sorts of positions, some lying down, some sitting, but all of them looked tattered. Burden sat next to him and cursed Rayon for being stubborn, but his voice contained some resignation. He put his hands on his knees, realizing that he almost died but was still standing here. Rina looked at that stubborn person without saying a word. She didn't look that tired, and her mentality from beginning to end remained unchanged. The dirty demon lord hovered above and growled in dissatisfaction because he couldn't do anything to this boy. But little did he know that he would never be able to take his body because Rayon had a goal from the beginning, using fire rings to force his body to develop further, and now he can smile with satisfaction. Suddenly, both he and Demon Venerable discovered something. It turned out to be a super huge status window reporting that their body stats had increased due to moving beyond their limits. Demon Venerable couldn't believe his eyes. Why the hell did the system increase Rayon's points for overcoming the Emperor's attack? He didn't know the reason either. He just rolled his eyes and read a few lines over and over again, ignoring the Demon Venerable howling in his ears. Rimmer stood on a high podium and announced to all the students who had lined up below the end of the test. Most of them knew they didn't pass, so they were very depressed. Rimmer gently waved his hand again, denying that what he had said before was just a lie. Everyone. The students below were upset because they tried their best and couldn't change anything. Rimmer's first sentence was so full of joking that the students thought I would teach them. But in the next sentence, he sternly criticized that if you continue to practice like that, you will soon eliminate yourself. Making the dissatisfied children speechless and unable to say a word. Obviously, they didn't do as I told them to run at full speed. Some were even so cunning that they used aura, making Burden startled and scared. Rimmer stopped in front of Rayon and gently bent down, teasing, "Just do as I tell you and you won't be eliminated." Standing up again, they announced that from now on they would all become temporary recruits, and in the next 6 months there would be more tests to become official warriors. Rimmer laughed loudly and said that he intended to choose the top rookie, but it was not convenient to reveal it right now. Next, he introduced the room and the training ground next door for the children to see for themselves. In the deep green forest, Rimmer was walking behind Lord Glen. He let out a teasing joke. The sun shined down, highlighting the whole sky with the Lord's appearance. When Glen asked about his nephew's condition, his friend teased him back. As expected, Burden and Renan have outstanding talent, and the other children also have the potential to become pillars for the family in the future. Having said that, how could those guys ignore the nephew that the Lord took the trouble to come all the way here? The boy's physical strength should have been exhausted a long time ago, but he did not give up. He laughed loudly because he knew that this would be an interesting story. The Lord jumped down from the stone steps, revealing the scar on his eye, reminded his friend of his mission to train warriors for the Zagard clan, and then left, leaving Rimmer alone there. Ga stood leaning against a tree and suddenly said that he might entrust his future to one of the new recruits, causing the patriarch to pause. The answer is all just a coincidence that seemed to disappear into the atmosphere when Glen walked away. The man in charge laughed lightly. The Lord himself knew that what he had just said was not the truth. Rayon sighed and wanted to go back to the training school first, but the critical eyes of the other students next to her. They looked at Rayon's back with hate in their hearts, still not asking any questions and blaming Rayon for doing something strange. Crane crossed his arms in silence for a moment and then concluded that it was because of the elixir, because it was rumored that Fan Ton had given Rayon a small bottle of purple gold potion mixed with light. The dissatisfied guys next to him jumped up and criticized the brat for only pretending that he could last until the end. It turned out he was on drugs. Crane raised his eyebrows to show the danger, and took the opportunity to invite the other guys to go and teach Rayon a lesson. They dragged Rayon into the deep forest, throwing his weak body into a tree, shaking the whole corner. Rayon frowned and endured the pain to question them, but they cursed loudly because Rayon had help from the elixir, so he could achieve such a feat. Rayon frowned and was too lazy to explain to the children. They began to exercise their muscles, shoulders and arms, standing tall in front of Rayon. Crane with lifeless eyes and fists rushed forward, causing Ma Tun to appear with dissatisfied cat-like ears when he saw his master being bullied. Who would have thought that Rayon would make a fist before Crane could touch his body, making his opponent's teeth and lips mixed up? Even Ma Tun howled in horror. What are you talking about? These snotty little brats. Crane fell to the ground, making the other two gasp in fear. His cheeks were marked with the marks of the enemy's hands without any strength to resist. Rayon opened his red eyes and raised his wrist to see through the veins, threatening them. If you like to talk with your fists, please do so. He gently nudged the black-haired man's elbow, then kicked the blue-haired man in the stomach, knocking his teeth out of his muzzle. Just as he was about to use his words instead of his muscles to curse Rayon, that kid was punched in the face. Crane just got up and is no exception. The wise-eyed old devil admired this weak boy, but actually punched them. Rayon continued his battle with lightning-fast and powerful punches until the black-haired boy turned his eyes white and mumbled and begged. The other two men lay face down. Crane put his hands on the ground and coughed and begged for mercy, but suddenly someone's foot crushed him to the point of pain. Rayon smiled contemptuously in satisfaction, asking if Burden was behind the orders. Crane was startled and faltered in denial, awkwardly saying no, we hid it from him. Burden had nothing to do with it. The answer surprised Rayon. He didn't expect the boy to look like he hated him, but he didn't seem that mean. As for these guys, they just have to make a few more threats. Rayon's question is, will you come back and tell me? The orange-haired girl was scared and said no, but Rayon still grabbed her long hair in pain. He brought the boy's face close so he could clearly see whether he was telling the truth or joking. From tomorrow onwards, stay away from him if you don't want to be beaten again. Crane hid his eyes for fear of being shot, then the three of them ran as fast as they could towards the training school. Everything that had just happened was observed by Rimmer standing behind the tree. He looked with pride as if he could see the image of the Lord when he was young in this skinny boy. That mysterious smile appeared in front of others again. He once again mumbled to himself, looking forward to this Rayon kid showing off. At night, the system announced an increase in points quickly, making the elite emperor angry, blaming the system for breaking a wire. What the hell did Rayon do to make the elite emperor happy and increase the points? Seeing that crazy look, Rayon asked the system owner why he didn't know how it worked. The guy put his face close to his face, accusing him of stealing but never letting someone else use it without knowing. Oh really? He replied nonchalantly as if to anger the elite emperor. Looking at this innocent look, if you're crazy, you'll only be angry at yourself, so you'll calm down and give in, saying you have a suggestion for this person. Bet with the elite, if you win I will give you the parameters, if you lose you must receive my wrath. As soon as he finished speaking, many betting notifications appeared on the system with the condition of passing the test for official students in the next 6 months, so that each parameter would be added 2 points. But to add to that, Rimmer said there would be a ranking so the results would definitely be 100 clear. And what's with the arbitrary attribute card as a reward? He explained that it was the skill of comprehending snow power, one of the attributes of the Emperor's essence that had been leveled down to suit the offender. Then what's the last part? Rayon asks if failure causes 10 emotional points. What is the level? Sun bared his fangs and smiled wickedly. The feeling of prosperity has no meaning, but if you keep it, you will lose control of yourself no matter how strong your will is. Rayon quickly understood that Demon Venerable's intention was to take over this body. He raised the glass of water to his mouth, thinking about the reputation of this temperamental guy. The reward seems to be better than the risk if you lose the bet, and now that Rayon falls into it, she has to try biting the apple to see if it's poisonous or not, but she doesn't have many options. A 12-year-old weakling couldn't even dream of becoming valedictorian, but he's a reincarnated assassin who's different. After thinking about it, Rayon immediately reached out his hand to accept the bet, making Ma Tun unable to hide his satisfied smile. The system stood witness to the bet with fury by a stream of blue light with a golden center appearing around Rayon's hand like a seal. Another day of training begins. The tired students fall down with the first exercise, running. Old Rimmer forced the students to do standing exercises, saying it was just like imaginary horse riding. Basically, just keep that position until you wake up. Some students' faces turned red, some protested and cursed heaven and earth, some wanted to give up. Burden stood up and told everyone to disperse and go practice separately, so the group dispersed, and Rayon watched those backs. The talkative demon lord jumped out and asked, "Hey, those guys are going to practice swordplay. Aren't you going to go?" Successful people have their own path. What Rayon needs now is not swordsmanship but a physical foundation that must be further improved. Currently, because of the power of the ice curse, his physical condition is still weaker than many people. For growth and training, the foundation is still the most important. Rayon's sweat drops touched the floor one after another. He needed to focus on strengthening his body more than anything else. Alone, practicing one exercise after another, he did not know that from outside the door Renan Sunlion was observing him from beginning to end. Her face showed no expression, but her inner admiration for Rayon's strength increased significantly. This kid's weightlifting ability is increasing day by day. Renan looked at the figure practicing in the gym and wondered how he could lift 10 kilograms more in 1 week. Experienced gamers can't do that either. Is it because this guy is different? How could a patient persevere to this extent, not leaving questions unanswered? Renan walked straight in front of Rayon, wanting to know what secret this guy was hiding. He looked at the girl in front of him, did not hesitate to call her by name, asking what she was doing here. 4 eyes looked at each other without saying a word. Rayon didn't know what this girl wanted from her. Looking from the front, he realized that the screen in front of him seemed flatter than usual. He thought to himself that it was strange how this girl had developed. Suddenly, as if waking up from a coma, Renan suddenly opened his eyes wide and looked straight at the other person as if his soul had just landed on Earth. Lowering her white eyelashes and moving forward, but not to talk to Rayon, the girl suddenly sat down and froze without saying anything. Ignoring the questions of the person next to her, she lay down behind her and lifted the weights. He suddenly stood up and left. If you want to practice, tell them to avoid it. Who would have thought that even when he went to practice hand diapering, Renan also followed and imitated him exactly, making him show his disgust on his face. Still not saying anything, lifting the weights, but now in Raina Ann's mind, she was sure of the thoughts she had been wondering about for so long. Looking at her hands, she suddenly realized that the cool scent from rayon was what helped her become stronger. It also had the ability to help her lift heavier weights than before. Hey, my train of thought was suddenly interrupted by Rayon's question. Do you have anything you want to tell me? The girl immediately denied it, leaving him with no choice but to scratch his head and leave in confusion, leaving the other person with eyes full of curiosity and admiration still watching him. Next, when Rayon moved to practice other equipment, she still clung to her and didn't let go. The door to the practice room opened. Burden walked in with a cold face, followed by 3 scared kids. At this time, Rayon also saw who walked in. The 2 guys hiding behind were bitter and dissatisfied with why Raina was with a guy who was kicked out of the mainstream lineage. Burden bitterly picked up the stick and stood up, knowing clearly that Rayon currently lacked strength and needed to practice those things, like a puppy being stalked by a pack of wild wolves. Remembering Rimmer's test, he tightly grasped the stick in his hand and stared at it. Thinking to myself, I clearly understood why Rayon was practicing this and not swordsmanship, but it was of no use, and tomorrow the results would tell the truth. Leading his group, Burden and them left the training room with hostile eyes still fixed on him. In the quiet night, leaves gently fell and shook the water surface. In the training room, a blue-haired boy came to talk to Rayon. Scratching his head, he introduced himself as Dorian and asked if he could practice with the 2 of them. Dorian has yellow eyes and a chubby face that looks very cute, looks very friendly, but Rayon only frowns, doing whatever he wants, he doesn't care. Happily thanking him, the boy groped for something in the black bag in front of his stomach, making the other 2 curiously look after him. He pushed a brown chocolate cookie into Rayon's hand, saying it was delicious. About to refuse, Rayon suddenly bumped into the longing gaze of the girl next to him. Rayon looked at the little girl with strange eyes when she didn't understand, but Rainin wasn't shy, opening her sparkling eyes wide and her bright pink cheeks full of curiosity, making Rayon have to give that piece of cake to her. Rainin devoured the cake with a happy face, and Rayon was bored with adding a tail next to him. During practice, Dorian was too weak to lift weights, so Rayon and Rainin had to stand beside him to help lift it. Day after day passed, the sunlight shone high above the green forest, the calendars were gradually replaced, and training sessions continued to take place. The 3 people, Rayon, Dorian and Rainin, still practice side by side day after day. In autumn, yellow leaves fall gently onto the still water surface. Shoes gradually get old over the years. Burden also did not give up and trained very seriously. 6 months have passed since the beginning of training. Rayon dedicated herself to training with the desire to pursue life. Gradually, the people ahead of him on the laps gradually decreased. Now when he looked up, his eyes focused on the people in front of him. Leading Rayon, there were only 2 people left, Burden and Rainin, and then time passed, and at training school number 5, the test day arrived. The noble marquises whispered about coming to join the festival. In the huge competition arena with the dukes watching from above, Helen and Sylvia participated with happy faces and not least Father Burden quietly observe. Ma Tun flew up around Rayon, reminding him of the bet he had made, sarcastically saying he still couldn't surpass Burden and Raina Ann. Rayon waved his hand firmly again, causing Ma Tun to step back in discomfort, then looked at Dorian with Raina Ann, who was sitting uncomfortably on the ground, stuttering. The kid said he was so stressed, just thinking about today's test made him breathe hard. Rayon was called out from behind by Raina Ann. She offered him a piece of cookie but was refused. Looking up ahead, I saw Burden's sharp eyes staring at them. Looking around, I saw Raina Ann happily eating cake, Burden with hateful eyes, and Dorian vomiting on the ground. Moreover, there was a demon lord flying above his head, making him wonder why there were such people around him. There was no one normal. Perhaps Sylvia and Helena in the audience were happily proud of their son who had passed 6 months of hard training. Looking down there and seeing that her son had many friends, Sylvia felt somewhat reassured. Remembering that Rayon never complained about anything since childhood, Sylvia calmed down and smiled softly. All the happy atmosphere just now was suddenly overwhelmed by another force, causing the two girls to startle and duck to the side in fear. Stepping proudly on the steps of the stage with a fluttering red robe, the man with the neatly trimmed yellow beard and sternly scared the Marquis, talking about the patriarch coming to see it himself. Glenn, solemn and emotionless, appeared majestically and fearfully, sat down on the chair, and immediately started whispering. Normally, lords would never participate in such petty matches. Rimmer's red hair revealed his love ears and teased the patriarch about what he was doing here, and what he suddenly said to the others. He glanced down and calmly said that this was an event related to the future of the entire family, and it was strange that the patriarch came to see. It's so right, how can you argue? Rimmer can only scratch his head. Then, he loudly raised his hand high and announced the start of the official trainee selection test. As soon as the green leaf fell gently, Rimmer looked around, creating a feeling that something was wrong. He controlled the power of his blue earth-type manner to always sneak around the students, clearly scaring them. Rayon was surprised and shielded himself from the terrible power that penetrated even his pressure. The green power enveloped Rimmer's body and sinisterly announced that this was today's exam. Rimmer radiates strength and claims that the test will assess the level of pressure ability because it is simply something that every warrior must face in life. A noble immediately objected. The children had only learned aura not long ago, so how could they handle the pressure test? Some people hadn't even learned it yet. They continued to complain about Rimmer's teaching style when he only slept during class, but forced students to take difficult tests. He looked up at the crowd of people milling about and sighed. The pressure was not simply using manners, it was the spiritual energy that the warriors had built up through their achievements. A true warrior is someone who doesn't have an aura and can still show off his skill. The black-haired man was about to argue, but suddenly stopped because the Lord interrupted him. Glenn agreed with Rimmer. Those who truly value the things around them will definitely learn how to cope with pressure. Rimmer looked up at his friend and smiled softly. Listening to Glenn's words, even someone who did not possess an aura could exert immense pressure through what he or she did. What a lord, he knows everything. Rimmer had Glenn's back and comfortably opened his arms wide to announce the start of the test. First, Renan walked towards the teacher in charge. According to the proposed law, Rimmer will release a certain amount of pressure for students to endure. If you pass and touch him, you will automatically pass the test successfully. Rimmer curled his lips and started to heat it up. With just one wide open eye, Rimmer summoned his power into a dazzling light that rushed towards Raina Ann, enveloping her. The pressure of the blow was so strong that she had to hug herself tightly and suppress it, still keeping a cheerful smile on her lips. I have to remind her that if she uses aura, she will fail, because he wants them to pass this test with the will that he has trained. Rainan tried her best to resist. She gritted her teeth, closed her eyes tightly, and took each step forward. Facing the terrible power, she stretched out her hand and finally touched the body of the teacher in charge. The source of power disappeared. Rimmer patted the girl's head to show satisfaction with this little girl. Supporting her with one hand and declaring that he had passed easily, Rainan breathlessly and tiredly received praise for his will from the teacher. The next person is Dorian. As soon as he heard his name, the boy trembled in fear. Then in fear he ran past Rainan to the teacher's front. Rimmer reminded him here to use willpower to overcome it, making the boy tremble even more, revealing that he did not have any willpower. Out of concern, Rimmer controlled his power to start the test, otherwise I would have simply failed and lost. The blue power flashed, making Dorian scared, covering his teeth with his hands, clenching his teeth with his knees pressed together. Rayon stood below observing everything, knowing that the pressure would change depending on the subject. It seemed like he had observed each person individually, so he adjusted the pressure based on their training level. It looked like it was a blur, but Rimmer really paid attention to his students. Dorian's test ended. Looking at Dorian hugging the teacher's leg trembling, Rimmer smiled brightly and bent down to ask this kid, "Has he seen it? Must be confident in yourself." Before the words were finished, the boy couldn't stand it anymore and vomited right next to the teacher's feet. Time gradually passed in training camp number 5. Sunlight shone on the silent water and it was Burden's turn. He boldly stepped in front of the teacher, and after starting to speak, his expression changed and he exerted strong pressure. Burden raised his eyebrows and looked worried as he resisted. The pressure was far different from what he had imagined. He trembled and fell to one knee, worried because he couldn't take another step. My heart secretly wondered how Reinen was able to overcome it. Seeing Burden kneel down and unable to take a step, Rimmer had to speak up and comment that students with talent like her were initially superior to others but were wasting her time, not having a goal but only improving her swordsmanship. To no avail. Burden stubbornly refused to give up, ignoring the sweat flowing from his mouth, gritting his teeth, and moving forward. Remembering the time when his father cruelly abandoned his eldest son, those cold eyes that did not tolerate the weak had been stuck in his heart ever since. So Burden is forced to try if he doesn't want to be thrown away like his brother. Thinking of this, he immediately rushed forward with all his strength, his other foot hurt off the ground, and finally he knelt down and successfully touched Rimmer's foot. Above, the teacher criticized the adult's behavior as if it was too much for a 12-year-old child and asked Burden to do what was right for him if he wanted to go further. Anyway, this kid has tried his best. Today Rimmer no longer let out bitter words, looked sharply into the distance and called Rayon Zeegard as the last person. He slowly moved forward, taking each step to face the teacher. Still smiling brightly, asking if I was ready. Rimmer began to release tornado-shaped pressure towards the student. The powerful source of power rushed like a whirlwind towards the small body, passing through it and pressing on the entire audience above the spectators. Sylvia screamed in panic and anxiety, while Helen's stomach tightened and she didn't dare say a word. Everyone including Glent knew Rimmer was coming out harder than any previous contestant. But most importantly, Rayon was still standing straight in shock, looking at the teacher and asking, "Is this really my test?" "I don't know." The teacher laughed loudly and frankly told me that his talent was probably above that of Burden and Reinen, so a few normal whirlwinds wouldn't have any effect. After speaking, the man changed his strange expression and concentrated his strength to create even greater pressure. Rayon covered his face to resist the incoming force, knowing full well that this thing had nothing to do with physical strength, it only affected the soul. And his soul is not only the immature 12-year-old Rayon Zeegert, but also the soul from his previous life when he was an enemy. So Rayon strode through the force of pressure, surprising Rimmer. He wanted to make things more dramatic, but could this kid really overcome it? Glenn sternly followed his nephew's every step. He was getting closer and closer, until Rayon raised his hand in front of the teacher's panicked face. Rimmer looked dumb, and the moment the boy's hand touched him, he realized that perhaps something had gone beyond the realm of impossibility. The audience was stunned for a moment, unable to believe what was happening, but the red-haired old man and his grandfather were stunned by the boy's confident smile. The sound of Rayon echoed gently in the wind. "Has the test ended yet?" The students cheered. Did he just overcome the pressure? Burden's father stood stunned and silent, while Rimmer sweated and rolled his eyes at his student. Rayon also just stood coldly in the face of sarcastic judgments. The teacher looked at him hesitantly and asked, "What is that?" "I've been watching you all this time, you're Rayon." He was surprised by his strength because he had deliberately adjusted it to be higher, but he did not expect to be able to overcome it easily. Rayon waved his hand at the teacher. He looked at the student with a puzzled look and then suddenly realized something was wrong.